Pretty much right after posting that last video, on one of the nights it hit somewhere around 0 degrees Fahrenheit, the fuel pump didn't really want to come on. I had to flick the switch a couple times before it would come on. Later on, when it was a little warmer, it was totally okay again. Next time it got really cold, it did it again, and it took 14 or 15 flips of that switch before the fuel pump came on. That's unacceptable. And then today I go to mess with it, it's warm, and nothing. You can still hear the relay clicking, but nothing's happening. I suspect the relay. It certainly seems like the most obvious choice, so we're gonna check that first. The fuel pump relay is in the stock location right under the hood. I'm gonna take the bracket off and pull the relay off, and we'll try a couple things to test it. So this is the fuel pump relay, and I can feel it clicking and hear it clicking. So it's definitely not the switch that's the problem, or the feed. First thing I'm gonna try is just removing it and installing it a couple times. See if it could just be contacts. Still nothing. So let's take off the neighboring relay. I don't really remember what this was for, but I've removed so much of the car's wiring, there's a good chance it's nothing. I don't think I've unhooked this one before. Man. So now what I'm gonna do is switch that with the fuel pump relay and try this guy. And the fuel pump came on like nothing was ever on. So it seems to be a problem with this relay. I can bench test this, but the fix for now is just gonna be to use this relay. I'll have to try to figure out what the one I disconnected is, because I sure don't know. So I just flipped through the Haynes manual, and the relay that we took out that we're gonna steal is actually the AC cutout relay. Now this thing doesn't have AC anymore, so we're pretty safe to steal that relay. So I put the good relay in, and the fuel pump worked, took it out, put the bad relay back in, and it didn't work. Good relay back in, it did work. So it's a very simple diagnosis. I'm not gonna even break out the multimeter or anything to test the things on the car here. Gonna do a quick and dirty multimeter test on this relay. This is the old fuel pump relay that we just took out. It may have just been bad contact then, because I wiped a whole lot of corrosion kind of stuff off of the blades on this. Let's put it back in the car and try this one. So I can't get this thing to work on the vehicle, but it passes the resistance test on the bench. So it must have some internal failure that's preventing it from carrying current, or making it difficult to carry current, which is why it would sometimes work after a whole bunch of tries. That's an interesting failure there. But anyway, I have that AC relay hooked up, so now everything is working totally fine. Next up, we're going to swap out the 180 degree thermostat for a 195. I mentioned in the last video that the heat on the highway just isn't very good. A lot of that's probably due to the bad door seals and the lack of insulation, but changing the thermostat back to the factory one will certainly help it. I've already got the thermostat sitting around, and I just cut some new gaskets, so we'll take care of that and the minor thermostat leak, which is still present at the same time. I'm going to do this with the radiator hose still attached. First thing we're going to do is drain a bit of coolant out of the radiator. This radiator has a little fitting on the bottom of it, so you can just slip a hose right over that and open the drain valve down here. Then you can remove the radiator cap to help it flow out. Okay, I think that'll be enough. I'm going to close the valve now. I'll close it nice and tight later on, just enough to stop it from draining for now. And then I'll go ahead and remove the thermostat housing. And we'll remove the 180 degree thermostat. Then we have to clean the thermostat housing. So I see the reason why it leaked, because I used the gasket that came with the rebuild kit. Maybe it doesn't bode well for the other parts in that kit, but it doesn't look like it was coolant resistant. This part right here is where the coolant went right through, and that's where it was seeping out on the manifold. So I won't double gasket it or anything. I'll just install it the exact same way, but use one of my gaskets. And then we gotta clean up both surfaces really well. And then, same as before, we'll lay down a thin bead of RTV on both sides. I just pulled this thermostat out of the parts pile. I think it's the one that came in the Firebird when I bought it, but I'm not too sure. I didn't have to drill a hole in this one because it actually has a jiggle valve in it, which basically serves the same purpose. It's just a factory solution for getting rid of air bubbles. So I'll make sure that's clean, and then drop it in place. Spring facing down, of course. And then I'll place on the gasket that I cut. And then Drop the thermostat housing back over it. And line the bolt holes up. Press straight down. Making sure the gasket stays as centered as possible. And I'll just get it a little bit snug. And then we'll leave that to sit for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. In the meantime, I'll close the radiator drain valve for good. What I usually do is get it as tight as I can by hand and then give it like 1/8 of a turn with pliers or something. Okay, it's been 10 or 15 minutes, so I'm going to come back and torque these down to 40 foot-pounds. Again, I'm only going that high because these are 7/16 bolts, not 3/8. Okay, that should be good. Hopefully, no leaks this time. I actually can't tell yet whether or not this oil cap helped with this leak here. I'm gonna try to clean the oil in the valve cover up really well this time, and if it comes back, then it's definitely still leaking. It might actually just be the paint interfering with the seal, but I'll look into it if I have to. Okay, now I actually cleaned it. If it shows up oily again, I know it's leaking. I doubled up the washers, spacing out the inspection cover, so instead of one, now there are two. There were 1 or 2 times, like in the Snow Donuts video actually, where you could hear the torque converter bolts still hitting the cover. So under certain crankshaft thrust conditions, I suppose, it could just barely touch. So I added a second washer to get a little bit extra distance, and haven't heard it or had any problems since, so I think the problem there is solved. So I just pulled it off to test it to see if it was blocked, and this stupid thing is already broken. I replaced this maybe a year ago. An easy way to test these, PCV valve is supposed to be a one-way valve, so you should be able to pull air through it, but not blow air through it. This one's obviously a little sketchy. I just had this one sitting around. This is what they're supposed to do. They should pull air through and not blow air through. I don't think that's necessarily related to the oil problem, but it sure ain't helping it. So now I'm gonna go ahead and warm the engine up, make sure that thermostat housing doesn't leak, and make sure the coolant situation gets sorted out. I'm going to check the timing and advance it maybe 2 degrees from where it is, and play with the carburetor a bit too. The engine would get hard to start on cold mornings, or start easily and then try to die soon afterwards. Okay, that's one thing. The fast idle seems to be too fast. Completely off the idle circuits. So let's turn that down. I played with the choke a bit and the fast idle, and it definitely is better than it was, but I still haven't quite cracked that one. Cold starts, it's usually pretty decent, but for hot starts, you still need to keep your foot on the gas for 10 or 15 seconds to keep it from dying. I'm going to have to keep poking around to figure out why it's doing that. But the truck is still running and I'm still driving it. The thermostat definitely improved the heat, but I think the bigger problem is that the vents simply aren't working, so where most of the heat comes out by default is the passenger side, so the passenger gets a lot warmer than the driver. I asked about the folding seats in the last episode, and some of you pointed out that it's an inertial lock, so normally the seats fold, but under hard braking or a collision, the seats lock. This truck is single-handedly getting me through the winter, and I just keep putting more miles on it. There are still a lot of improvements I'd like to make, but whether hauling stuff or simply getting me from place to place, it's still getting the job done.